Aussie engineering jobs being sent overseas. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian here and welcome to another episode of Heiser Says. Grab your hashtag recession-proof instant coffee and we are going to have a look at an article discussing more jobs being sent overseas. But this one, well, it's a little different. It's a company that can only operate here through, the extraction of valuable Australian minerals and resources. Now, I have no problem with foreign companies coming here and extracting resources as long as, we maximize the wealth that is retained by our civilization and our people. That's meant to be the goal, isn't it? So we'll have to have a look at this, and I'd like to get your opinion on this topic here, because we've got a lot of people who work in the construction industry on the channel. I've worked mainly with, I'm trying to think when I've worked with any offshore engineers. I know a few of them offshore the drafting of it, which can be frustrating because then coordination. On a project, you'll have a whole team of people working on it. You'll have architects, you'll have engineers, and engineers, there'll be all several different types. You'll have mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, structural engineers, civil engineers. Then you'll have acoustic engineers, fire engineers. What's frustrating is when you get a multidisciplinary engineering practice, say one that has, they've got plumbers, or so hydraulic, electrical and mechanical. That's a pretty standard combo. And you'd expect that if the people are working in the same office, that they would all communicate to each other clearly and coordinate to make sure that they're part of the project that they're doing, like designing a lighting system and designing a mechanical ventilation system for a building, wouldn't conflict with itself, with their own team. At least that's what I thought in my naive days. We had some projects, 2011, these were our first ever jobs we were doing in the mining sector. And I remember we were working with a multidisciplinary team, and it got so frustrating that they weren't coordinating with their own people. We went into their office, I brought a laptop, and we were showing them how to do it. How to coordinate and check for collision detections between the guy sitting there doing the mechanical vents and the guy sitting there doing the lights. So we wouldn't have to pick it all up all the time and report back to try and get it going a bit faster. And these were jobs with several buildings. And I think this was the second time round on the second mine. And sometimes it's actually better to have different disciplines for each specialized engineering field, because then, they tend to work a bit, they'll be less complacent perhaps. But then otherwise, on another job, we went with a different practice, and they were fantastic. Coordinated it all, got it all sorted, and it's only years later that I realized they went out to one specialist draftee that knew exactly what she was doing. So there you go. So let's have a look at this, because these are Australian jobs being sent overseas. And this is from Ball & Cold. Pardon me. So, Chevron pushes contractors to send Australian engineering jobs overseas. Now, Chevron is a huge mining and gas company. And, they're big boys in the field. I've tended on a few jobs for Chevron projects. Back in the day, I've seen the drawings that they've produced for these big projects, or they've engaged others to produce. Now, you would hope that these large companies that are making a significant amount of money here in Australia, extracting resources here in Australia, would have some expectations placed on them that they need to engage Australian labour. Not just for those working on the site, also for the technical and problem solving, at least a significant portion of it, to ensure, as a nation, we maximize the return on investment we receive from, allowing them to extract these resources from Australia. But what do you reckon? Let me know your thoughts on that one. So, the US giant, which made $8 billion in Australia in 2024, is forcing its subcontractors to follow its example and sending engineering jobs overseas. So not even its subbies working underneath them. Oh, this is interesting. So, Chevron is insisting that engineering companies in Australia send work to low-cost countries like India in a seeming clash with local content obligations imposed by the West Australian government. The revelation comes after Ball & Called reported the $387 billion company was also sending work once conducted by its own engineers in Perth to India using criteria that did not have preference for local content. I mean, this is... I know you get all the bleeding heart lefties want to tax these companies into oblivion. I would rather we insist that they keep their jobs here in Australia. And you can quite easily make that a competitive aspect of the right to access the resources. Because, well, this is how mining companies help Australians. Coal mines have helped me start my business and raise my family because we worked on them years ago. And then that led to skills that we've applied to a whole range of different projects. You would be shocked where stuff leads. Chevron is also cutting its global workforce by 15 to 20%, which if applied to Australia would result in 300 to 400 job losses. The US oil and gas giant has set the minimum amount of work to be done overseas as high as 55%, according to excerpts from a Chevron contract with a major engineering service provider seen by Ball & Called. So why... I mean, just think about that. I mean, if I think back to some of the contracts that were passed down to us, we were a subby under a subby to Bechtel and all the conditions and bullshit they put in these contracts. So rather than you've got government projects where they will insist on a certain percentage of indigenous employment, particularly for these remote projects or significant infrastructure jobs. I was talking to a PM the other day, and what they were doing is, rather than trying to save the world, they would find kids that were, from good, stable families that were looking at different career options, indigenous kids, and they'd say, do you want to work in the construction industry? Do you want to get a trade? There's an opportunity here. It's a 3-year-long project. You pretty much get your trade done. And that's how they met the criteria. I like that type of initiative because that creates jobs and that provides skills. But I guess we're providing jobs and skills in India now with 55%. The targets were not enforced in 2024, but in 2025, workshare utilization is a key performance indicator for companies providing engineering services to Chevron, according to an engineer with knowledge of the arrangements, who is not authorized to speak to the media. They said the KPI would impact the contractor's financial returns and its chances of securing additional work. Wow. I mean, this is an issue that I'm hoping we should bring attention to some of our more vocal politicians. Because, well, as much as Australia and India are close nations, we want to keep as much of our competitive advantage, that little that we have, in our engineering sector. Workshare utilization, because I mean, this means they're only doing it for monetary purposes. And how many of you, let me know if you send, I mean, what type of work could you send overseas? I'm thinking of it. There are a few steel draftees I know, or steel fabricators that offshore the work, but then you got to check it all anyway. Workshare utilization was defined in the contract as the proportion of total hours worked in India or Colombia. So it could be Colombia too. The minimum portion of work sent overseas was 40% for small projects and front-end engineering design, 30% for pre-feed work, and 55% for detailed design. What the hell? I mean, this is just them trying to save money. Why are they putting that on their subbies? It should be none of their business. Are they trying to improve the quality of life in India and Colombia in some type of outreach program? I doubt it. I think they're just trying to get a cheap deal. Many Perth oil and gas engineers have contacted Ball & Called with concerns not just about their own jobs, but the future of their profession in Western Australia. I mean, you would think engineering, I mean, we're talking to our son about this. Australia it's a natural resource country. That's why we don't have the economic complexity. We're a colony on the edge of the planet where people love to buy real estate, send their kids for foreign education. The whole country's run by a couple of banks, they're with a bunch of mortgages and a country on the side. But you think engineering in the natural resource sector would be pretty good, would be pretty stable. It's not going anywhere. But then you've got Chevron, a US company, putting pressure on their subbies to offshore. I mean, they can do what they want, but even they shouldn't. Pressure on their subbies to offshore work. Just think how much time you're going to have to check it. Here's the problem. If you're sending work overseas, India would be better. You've got not as many language issues, but Colombia. Chevron's push to move its contracted engineering work to low-cost countries was regarded as likely more damaging than its plan to cut its own Perth team. Many noted that other mining, as well as oil and gas companies operating in WA, were also actively minimizing the amount of engineering done in the state that owns the resources they extract. One engineer was particularly concerned about detailed design going overseas, as performing this work was how many new graduates entered the profession. It's the same thing with a lot of architectural practices, sending all the drafting work overseas. When I was a young student, when I didn't have as grey a beard as I do now, we did the QT course, not the UQ, that's the other uni. At QT, our point of difference was you would work in an office while you studied. So from your first year of university, you had 1 day at uni a week, 4 days in an office. Some firms would even push up to 4.5 days in an office. So that was real world experience. You weren't paid much, but you were doing all the shit kicker work, all the drafting, all the things that, they could afford to get you to do because you were so much cheaper than everyone else, and you learned some skills and you learned them fast. And you got a taste for what the profession was. Is this what's happening here now? Okay, you're losing what the younger generation can learn on. The local branch of large global firms such as WSP, Wood and Woolley perform most of their engineering work done for Chevron in Perth. A Perth-based senior executive with a global engineering firm, not authorized to speak to the media, said these firms had their own incentives to send Chevron's work overseas, as they kept much of the savings from lower wages themselves and only allocated a portion to Chevron. So, there you go. They want to do it too. WA is a vital part of Chevron's global business. Its stakes in the 2 gas export plants it operates in WA, Gorgon and Wheatstone, together with a share of Woodside North's West Shelf project, earned it a profit of $5.2 billion in 2024, 30% of its global earnings. The profits were only possible because of 2 deals Chevron made with the WA government: the Barrow Island Act for Gorgon and the confidential Wheatstone State Development Agreement, whose local content provisions were only made public weeks ago when tabled in Parliament. Now, this is the thing. We want to get development. We want to reduce sovereign risk from government interfering, but we also want to make sure that Aussies are the ones reaping the benefit of this. We want to keep the work in our country. Chevron is required to use local consultants, such as engineers, when it is commercially practical for Wheatstone and as far as it is reasonable and economically practical to do so for Gorgon. Yeah, but there's a lot of wiggle room in those terms, isn't it? A lot of wiggle room. Chevron was asked whether it would amend its contracts with engineering companies to exclude work for the Gorgon and Wheatstone projects from work share utilization targets. A Chevron spokesman said it was committed to meeting its local content obligations and required its contractors to comply with its Australian industry participation requirements. So they're pushing the buck onto the subbies. So they're probably hearing one thing, doing another. Boy. Given our operating assets in WA, Gorgon and Wheatstone are long-term energy developments. We will continue to depend on the talent of our local workforce for decades to come. Since 2009, together with our joint venture partners, we have spent more than $80 billion in Australia on our Gorgon and Wheatstone natural gas facilities. Around 90% of our annual operating expenditure is spent in Australia. Yes, but I'm interested in one aspect, the engineering. Probably, how much of that can't you, if you would, how much of it would they ship overseas if they could find a way? A spokesperson for Premier Roger Cook said he had written to Chevron to remind them of their local content provisions stipulated in state development agreements and his expectation that they would be fulfilled. I mean, what's the recourse if it's not fulfilled? What's the legal process that has to go on? How long would that be dragged out? Creating local jobs is a priority for the state government, as demonstrated through our Made in WA plan, she said. We continue to expect large resource projects to employ West Australians and use local businesses. On the 18th of May, Chevron had 159 jobs advertised in India and only 7 in Australia, of which were 12-week-long, all of which were 12-week-long summer internships. So, I mean, there you go. So, and that was written by Peter Milne from Boiling Cold. That's a new one. Someone mentioned this in the comments, so I thought I'd look it up. And well, this is definitely a publication to keep an eye on. So let's have a bit of a chat about this, guys. So the question here is, should we be allowing these businesses to reap the benefit of these resources, but also circumvent the obligations that were put upon them as part of the deal? Do you want to let them change the deal afterwards? Or should we take the complete libertarian argument? No state intervention at all, let the market decide the solution. Or is that too dangerous? Do we need to have a smarter solution? Maybe a bit more, well, of an insistence that, because remember, this is a one-time thing. Once these resources are gone, these companies are gone. These opportunities are gone. You want to use it to generate wealth in our country as we can. Sure, in Australia, it'll all go into housing. All the wealth will go into housing. I know that. That's a different argument for another episode. But I think I would want the work to be done in Australia. I would want as much of it to be done in the engineering sector. Given the amount these companies have in revenue, the difference between employing someone in Australia and employing someone in India or Colombia, sure, for that particular role is, well, there will be a stark difference. But the long-term impact on our country, I think it's, well, certainly something to investigate. And, hey, these are the conditions they signed up for. They shouldn't be able to change it now. What do you think, everyone? Let me know your opinions on this one. And please share in the comments if you have, well, worked with offshore engineering. As an architect, I have a couple of times. Not... Well, let's just say we got a whole lot of stuff from Bechtel for those first mining jobs I told you. We had to essentially review and throw everything out for compliance with Australian design requirements, Australian building code requirements, Australian accessibility requirements. Would you trust the engineering? Anyway, take care. Have a great day. See you next time. Bye for now.